Right, so get ready. Because today we're going deep, really deep. We're diving into some pretty heavy philosophical concepts, being, essence, and concept. And get this, the tool we're using to explore these ideas is, well, a tree.
Yeah, it's surprising, right? How something so ordinary, I mean, we see trees everywhere, can offer these incredibly profound insights. Our source material uses this tree analogy as a metaphor to kind of unpack these really complex philosophical ideas. And it draws all these interesting parallels between, like, how a tree grows and our own human
I
experiences.
like that. Okay, so let's start with this tree metaphor then. The source says that the trunk of the tree represents being, that solid, grounded, just existing part of it. But then there's this whole idea of nothing. And it's not just emptiness, but more like this realm of potential, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not just a blank slate. It's more like the source describes it as the space between the branches, or even like the void beneath the roots. It's all that unseen energy, that possibility for growth and transformation.
Okay, so it's like the tree's being is like the solid core, the trunk, and nothing is like this expansive space around it where everything can happen. And that brings us to becoming the bridge between the two.
Right, exactly. Becoming is that dynamic process that connects it all. It's like the trunk to the branches, the roots reaching down into the soil, that constant evolution, that journey from potential to actuality.
And that's where the source makes this connection to our own lives, right? It says that our sense of self, who we believe ourselves to be, is like that sturdy trunk. It's our being.
Right.
But we also have this huge, like, undefined potential within us, kind of like the space between those branches, our own nothing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the source takes it even further with this really cool analogy. It compares a newborn child emerging from the womb to a sapling sprouting from the earth. It's like they're both suddenly experiencing this absence for the first time. And it creates this natural tension, this kind of push and pull. Like there's the desire to retreat back to the comfort of the womb or the roots seeking soil, but at the same time, there's this urge to grow towards the light like branches reaching for the sun.
That's such a powerful image. It really captures that feeling, that back and forth we experience in life, that desire for security, but also that urge to explore the unknown.
Yeah, and the source emphasizes that this tension, this interplay between retreating and growing, it's a defining characteristic of human existence. It's what fuels our becoming.
Okay, so how does all of this relate to how we make sense of the world? All this being and nothing and becoming.
Well, the source says it starts with, just paying attention to our senses. It's like recognizing the qualities of things we experience. Like the simple observation, the tree is brown and green. And that basic statement, it actually highlights that interplay between being and nothingness that we were just talking about.
So when we acknowledge that the tree is, we're recognizing its being.
Mm.
But then by defining it with qualities brown and green, we're separating it from everything else, right?
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
Definition creates distinction. It's like carving out a space for the tree to exist in the middle of all that vast nothingness. It's like saying, okay, this is a tree, and it's not that river flowing next to it, even though they both exist in the same, ecosystem.
It's amazing how these simple observations, like the tree is brown, have these huge implications for how we understand the world. Like we're constantly drawing lines, defining and separating things to make sense of it all.
It's true. And then the source brings up this idea of quantity, which adds another layer to the whole thing, complements quality. So while quality defines, like saying this is an oak tree, quantity measures, this oak tree is 50 years old.
Mhm.
And both quality and quantity, they're dynamic. They're constantly changing. They're influenced by the environment, by growth, by hardship. It's kind of like those rings on a tree trunk, right? They expand and contract in response to everything that's happening around them.
Oh, I see. That makes me think about how our own experiences shape who we become. Like all those challenges and triumphs, they become a part of us, almost like they're etched into our being, just like those rings on the tree.
That's a great connection. And then the source brings up this really interesting idea of measure, which is like this meeting point between quality and quantity. It's how those two come together. Measure bridges the subjective and objective. It takes something as personal as, looking at a tree and makes it universally relatable. Suddenly, like, this tree is 30 meters tall becomes this fact that anyone can understand, regardless of their own experience with that specific tree.
So measure helps us connect with other people, to find common ground in our own individual experiences of the world. It's incredible how these simple concepts are also deeply intertwined.
Isn't it? And the source makes sure to remind us that becoming, that constant evolution we've been talking about, is like the glue that holds all these concepts together. Being Nothing, quality, quantity, measure. It's like the tree, always growing, shedding its leaves, transforming, always in motion, and so are we.
So we've explored being and nothing and becoming, and even like touched on measure, all through the lens of this tree. Right now, the source takes us deeper into this idea of essence. It's like we're moving past just the physical structure of the tree, going, beyond the bark and branches and getting to something more, I don't know, essential.
Yeah, it is like peeling back those layers. It's
Yeah.
like we're trying to see the very life force that makes the tree a tree. The source says we have to look beyond just what we see on the surface to really understand that dynamic unity that gives meaning to what we're looking at.
So it's not just about seeing a tree, it's about understanding what it means to be a tree, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like being is that raw potential, remember, like that tree trunk.
Right.
But essence, that's where things start to get unique, where all those forms take shape, where those deeper patterns emerge.
But how do we actually grasp essence? I mean, it seems so abstract.
Well, the source uses that tree example again to show us how this works. It says what we see, the leaves, the branches, the shape, all that's just the appearance. But the essence of the tree, that's in its connection to everything else. Its relationship with the soil, the sun, the rain, the whole ecosystem. It's about that continual becoming that we talked about before.
So essence is about understanding the tree, not just as this one thing, but as part of this whole web of relationship.
Exactly. And that leads us to this challenge the source points out. Actually recognizing essence. It uses these two cool terms. Positive shine, that's when we can actually see the essence kind of shining through the appearance. And then there's negative semblance. That's when we get stuck on the surface and mistake the appearance for the whole truth.
No, I get it. It's like you can get so distracted by the details, all those leaves and branches, that we miss the bigger picture, that interconnection that makes the tree what it is.
Right. And the source gives us this great example, the moon. We see it in the sky, this bright disk, but we know it's way more than that. It's a celestial body, and it has this huge impact on our planet. Its essence is reflected in its appearance, even if we don't immediately get the full picture.
Okay, that makes sense. It reminds me of how the source talks about the role of a king, right? A good king isn't just someone who rules from a position of power. A true king, they reflect the essence of their kingdom.
Oh, I love that comparison. The source explains that a true king, their authority doesn't come from being isolated and powerful. It comes from understanding all the connections, the relationships in their kingdom. They're strong because they recognize those connections and act in a way that, works with them.
So it's like the king's leadership reflects the essence of their kingdom, just like the tree's growth reflects its connection with the whole environment.
Precisely. And the source even mentions the Hebrew kings and how they understood that real leadership isn't about forcing your will on people. It's about understanding those relationships that define the world and working within them.
It's amazing how these ideas from so long ago are still relevant today. I mean, don't we all want leaders who can see that big picture, leaders who understand that everything is connected?
Absolutely. And that brings us to a really important point. The need to move past just being, that raw potential, and actually step into our essence. It's about living in that reality of connection and purpose, recognizing that we are all part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Okay, so we've explored being, nothing, becoming, measure, and now essence. I feel like there's this pattern here, like we're building towards something even bigger.
You're right on track. And that brings us to the grand finale, the culmination of all these ideas, the concept itself. But it's not just any concept, it's concept with a capital C. The source introduces us to Hegel's idea of the concept. It's like the framework where being and essence finally come together, they're unified.
Wow, okay, so what makes this concept so special?
Well, for Hegel, the concept isn't just sitting there, static. It's alive, it's dynamic, it's self-determining. It's constantly evolving and moving through all these relationships and interconnections.
So it's kind of like the tree itself, always growing, always changing, responding to everything around it.
Exactly. And to really understand how dynamic this concept is, the source uses this really powerful example, Mary, the mother of Jesus, during the crucifixion.
Now, that's an interesting choice. How does Mary's experience connect to this philosophical concept?
Well, Mary's experience really embodies how dynamic Hegel's concept is. Just imagine witnessing the suffering of your son, knowing he is both God and man, and not turning away. Mary endured that unimaginable pain. She was fully present in that moment, that huge agony.
That's a truly heartbreaking image, but I think I'm starting to see the connection to the concept. Mary's suffering, it wasn't passive, was it? It was this active embrace of human pain, like a testament to the power of love and empathy.
Exactly. And her experience shows us that there's this possibility for transformation, for a deeper unity with the divine. It's a concept called theosis. It's like she transcended her own personal agony to become a universal symbol of compassion and connection.
So it's like she took that suffering and, I don't know, transformed it into something more, something that connects all of us on a deeper level.
That's it. And the source asks this really thought-provoking question. Do we let suffering break us? Or do we use it as a way to become one with the divine, to move toward theosis? Mary, with her strength and empathy, she shows us how to do that.
That's a powerful message, especially in a world where there is so much suffering. It's like she's showing us that there's a way to transform pain into something meaningful, something that connects us to something bigger than ourselves.
Precisely. And the source emphasizes that Mary isn't just this passive, good person. She's an active participant in a divine plan. She's striving toward godliness through their unwavering unity with her son. And this brings it back to you, the listener. It's about listening to your own three wise men. You know, those little signs of divine grace inside you, the ones that push you to connect with other people, even when you're both going through something difficult.
Oh, I like that image. Our own three wise men guiding us toward empathy and connection. Like we all have this inner wisdom urging us to reach out, even when things are hard.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Hegel's concept. It's not some far off, unreachable ideal. It's a reality that's always in motion, working through contradictions and evolving into something better. The source actually quotes the philosopher Stanley Rosen. He said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, Hegel shows us that the very thing that makes us think everything is meaningless is actually the foundation for how being is saved from nothingness.
Whoa, okay. That's a lot to unpack. Can you maybe break that down for us a little?
Sure. It's basically saying that those tough things in life, those contradictions and tensions, the things that make us feel like there's no point, those are actually the things that push us toward transformation, toward a deeper sense of unity. Like a tree going through a storm, it comes out stronger because of it.
So it's not about avoiding hardship or pretending that everything is perfect. It's about leaning into those challenges and finding meaning in them.
Exactly. And the source goes on to explain how even the idea of space itself is different in Hegel's concept. It's not just empty space, it's like this arena for potential, for freedom. It becomes a universe that's constantly becoming.
That's amazing. So everything around us is just buzzing with possibilities, just waiting to be realized. But how do we tap into that? How do we make that leap from just being to actually becoming?
That's where the idea of self-determination comes in. That freedom we get through, having those dynamic relationships with others. The source does this really cool comparison between Mary, the prophet Jeremiah, and Jesus. Jeremiah, even though he had this deep empathy and connection to God, he still had his limitations. I mean, he was human. His emotions, even though they were powerful, they sometimes overwhelmed him.
So even someone like Jeremiah, so connected to God, had moments where he felt weak.
Yeah. It's kind of comforting to hear.
It is, right. It shows us the limits of human empathy. It reminds us that we all struggle sometimes. But then the source contrasts Jeremiah with Jesus, who's described as like the ultimate embodiment of the concept.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does Jesus embody the concept in a way that Jeremiah didn't?
Well, while Jeremiah felt God's suffering so deeply, Jesus was unity. He was the Logos, the Word made flesh. Unlike the prophets who sometimes faltered, Jesus stayed in perfect alignment with the divine will. His compassion went beyond just his family and friends. It transcended those immediate relationships. So it's like he was operating on this whole other level of love and understanding.
Exactly. And the source actually points out this really powerful quote from the Gospels. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother.
Wow, that's radical. So it's not about putting our immediate circle first. It's about aligning ourselves with a higher purpose.
Exactly. And that leads us to the challenge, but also the amazing promise of the concept. It's calling us to move beyond just ourselves, to actually embody divine love and grace in our own lives.
That sounds like a tall order. How do we even begin to do that?
Well, the source suggests that theosis, that process of becoming like God, it's not just some unattainable idea. It's actually a very practical concept. It's about letting our bodies and souls become what St. Gregory Palamas called thin places, places where heaven and earth meet, vessels of divine grace.
I love that image. Becoming thin places, like we become these channels for something so much greater than ourselves.
Exactly. And Maximus the Confessor explained that God's love isn't this abstract thing, far away. It's woven into everything, into the very fabric of creation.
So it's all around us, just waiting to be discovered and experienced.
Precisely. And Our role then is to cultivate those logo, those divine seeds that are planted within us. And they're not just passive, they're active. They're pushing us to grow, to become more aligned with God's will.
It's like we have all this incredible potential inside us, and we're responsible for helping it grow.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And through that process of cultivating those divine seeds, our hearts grow to encompass not just those we're close to, but all of creation. We start to reflect God's love in our own lives.
This is all starting to feel very interconnected. The tree, the concept, Mary, Jesus, they're all reflecting the same truth about unity and transformation and love.
You're exactly right. And the source points to Jesus as the ultimate model for how to do this. Fully human and fully divine, he showed us how to live a life that's engaged in the world, but also open to eternity.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this part alone. Hegel's concept, the power of suffering, the call to embody divine love, it's a lot to take in. Maybe you should pause here for a minute and give our listeners a chance to process all this.
That's a good idea. We've been in some deep waters today, but remember, even in the depths, there's incredible beauty and potential just waiting to be discovered.
So to all our deep divers out there, hold on to that image of the tree, constantly growing, reaching toward the light. It's a symbol of our own journey of becoming. We'll be back soon with the final part of our deep dive. Stay curious. All right, welcome back, deep divers. We've been on quite a journey so far, exploring being, essence, and concept. And I'm really curious to see where we end up with this last part.
Yeah, it has been fascinating, hasn't it? Unraveling all these ideas. And the source does something really interesting in this last section. It brings in this whole argument from Hegel about absolute idealism to help us understand that tension between our ideals, how we think things should be, and the reality that we actually live in.
Okay, absolute idealism. That sounds pretty intense. Can you break that down for us a bit? What does that even mean? And how does it connect to everything we've been talking about?
Yeah, sure. It might sound intimidating, but it's actually a really helpful way to think about how we understand the world. Basically, Hegel's saying that nature, the world as we experience it, it can never fully live up to those ideals that we impose on it. There's always this gap between our ideas, how we try to make sense of things, and the way things actually are with all their messiness and unpredictability.
I think I see what you mean. It's like we have this blueprint in our minds, this idea of how things should be. But the world doesn't always cooperate, does it?
Exactly. Hegel actually calls this the impotence of nature. But it's not that nature itself is lacking or anything. It's more that our human minds, we just have this insatiable need for order. We want to impose meaning on everything. We try to fit the world into these neat little boxes, but life always has a way of overflowing, spilling over the edges.
So it's more about our perception than nature itself. We're the ones imposing limitations.
You got it. The source uses this great example, the distribution of species. Why are there so many more beetles in the world than mammals? There's no, logical reason for it. That's just the way nature is.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's like nature has its own logic, its own way of doing things. And a lot of times it just doesn't fit into the categories we try to create for it.
Right. And this brings us to this idea of judgment. Hegel suggests that the way we make decisions and recognize relationships, it's not just about figuring out what's true or false, right? It's about understanding how universality, particularity, and singularity all work together to form a concept.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm following. Can you give us an example?
Sure, think about a tree again. We can say that all trees share certain characteristics, right? They have roots and a trunk and branches and leaves. That's the universal part. But then each individual tree is unique, right? It's shaped by its specific environment, all the things that have happened to it. That's the particularity. And then there's the singularity of this one specific tree right here, right now, with its own individual story. Judgment is about understanding how all those levels, the universal, the particular, and the singular, they all come together to create meaning.
Okay, I'm starting to see it now. It's like zooming in and out, seeing the big picture and the tiny details all at the same time.
Exactly. And this connects to the idea of syllogisms, that classic logical structure.
Yeah.
If A is true and B is true, then C must also be true. Hegel takes that basic structure and shows us that it's not just about, cold, hard logic. It's about connecting ideas in a way that's meaningful. Syllogism becomes a way of justifying the conclusions that we reach through reasoning.
So it's like we're always trying to make sense of the world, find those patterns and connections, and syllogisms are one of the tools we use to do that.
Exactly. And here's where Hegel gets really interesting. He says that rationality, thinking logically, isn't just some detached impersonal system. It's normative. Meaning that when we say something is rational, we're also saying, like, this is how it should be. And we kind of expect other people to agree with us.
Oh, so it's not just about thinking logically, it's about acting based on those logical principles too.
You got it. And that leads us to another really important point. Hegel says that our idea of meaning, like how we make sense of the world, is the most fundamental part of how we experience reality. But he also acknowledges that empirical reality, like the physical world we actually encounter, can never fully live up to that ideal. There's always going to be this gap between what we think should be and what actually is.
That really resonates with what we were saying before about how we try to impose our ideas on nature, but nature doesn't always follow our rules.
Exactly. And Hegel's saying, it's not nature that has the problem, it's us. We have this deep need to find order and meaning, and when we can't find it, we start to see nature as lacking something. But really, it's our understanding that's limited, not nature itself.
So we're the ones with the limitations, not nature. Even with all our scientific advancements, we'll never fully grasp the complexity of it all.
That's the paradox, isn't it? But it's not about giving up on reason or logic. It's about understanding that they have their limits, that gap between our ideals and the world. That's what keeps us going, It pushes us to keep learning and growing, even if we never find all the answers.
That's actually kind of hopeful when you think about it. Like we're on this endless journey of discovery, always searching but never quite arriving. And it's that very journey, that tension between what is and what could be, that makes life meaningful.
Beautifully said. And that's where Hegel's concept comes full circle. It's not about having all the answers. It's about embracing the process of questioning, exploring, and becoming. It's about recognizing our connection to everything around us and participating in the ongoing creation of reality.
Wow, we've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. The tree, Hegel's concept, Mary's resilience, the limits of human understanding. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And as we wrap up, I keep coming back to that image of the tree. It's such a powerful symbol of growth and transformation and interconnectedness. The source leaves us with this beautiful invitation. The next time you see a tree, just take a moment to think about its journey, its resilience, its constant evolution. You might just find a reflection of your own journey in those branches and roots.
I love that. It's a reminder that even in the simplest things, there are these profound truths about ourselves and the world, just waiting to be discovered. So to all our fellow deep divers out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep becoming. Until next time.